Please join me in welcoming to the stage Meena Singh.
It's been pretty interesting listening to the things that you guys have been talking about in terms of revolutionary new ways of building clinical trials, incorporating mobile information. Normally, when I talk about precision medicine and some of the things that we hope to do, I spend much more of my time explaining what that could look like, what the world could look like if we could collect data from patients, if we had more of a feedback loop into a care management tool. You guys sound like you've got that covered. You understand the value of figuring out how to incorporate EHR data, and it's much more of a conversation about some of the hurdles. So I think it's actually an incredibly good fit for us to be having a conversation. You know, we are at a moment in time, and it's only highlighted by all the things that you guys are working on, that the capabilities that are possible for bringing information together to build a large aggregate data store, some computational capabilities, and our abilities to apply, 10,000 minds to that, as opposed to just a couple researchers who have put in the grant for the money and for the infrastructure, is finally a reality. The cost of sequencing has come down. Our ability to measure an incredible number of other markers, your microbiome, different physical factors that you experience throughout your day, even your interpersonal interactions, right? We have much better capacity, not to mention the ever-declining cost of computational infrastructure. So, it's an incredible time for this. And as a result, I don't know, how many of you before this had ever heard of the Precision Medicine Initiative? Okay, so that's most people. Fantastic. So the president announced it. The president sort of was watching the data come in about EHR penetration and all of the things that we have been talking about all day, and basically wanted to consolidate much more of a coherent initiative to move all of us forward along a path of making all of that incorporated. So how do we start to have an alignment around what it would look like if we could really do science on top of our healthcare system more easily, if we could do science on top of all the things that we know about ourselves. And so we've come up with a mission, which I'll read and which will really resonate with you, to enable a new era of medicine through research, technology, and policies that empower patients, researchers, and providers to work toward development of individualized care. And I think that will resonate as basically the key thing that each of you is working towards in your roles every day. And so hopefully, this all makes sense as the right set of activities, but we're really interested in understanding more what can enable those sorts of things. So PMI is an incredibly broad initiative. It encompasses many of the agencies across the government, primarily those focused on health, of course. But I think one of the key goals is to figure out how to reduce some of the barriers to doing science on healthcare. So, in each of these discussions, we've heard talk of what some of the challenges are in terms of doing translational research, doing ex post analysis of large data sets that you already have, and trying to generate new evidence for efficacy. So one of the goals here is to try and look across the board at the various pieces which pose challenges and set up initiatives to try and move those forward and improve them. So if you think about the specific pillars where I think there was an opportunity to create something for a foundation for all of this research to rest on, one thing is privacy. I think there's a national conversation about privacy in healthcare and what that really means. And I think there's a national conversation in terms of privacy in any of our digital data. And I think perspectives have been changing. So we felt like it was time for a refresh and to sort of put something down. So, we ran a series of multi-stakeholder meetings, a lot of experts, a lot of bioethicists, and we've developed a set of privacy principles that will guide a lot of the work within and across precision medicine. And that's something that we'll be living, right? Those will change over time. Patient choice is a key tenet of precision medicine. So one of the fundamental goals was to put the patient back in the center and help them when appropriate, right? But I think many of us would argue at this day and age when appropriate is more than it used to seem, more frequently. And so that means HIPAA guidance, additional guidance around HIPAA, making it clear exactly what patient rights are, patients' rights to accessing their data, There's also an update to the common rule coming, which is open for comment right now in case any of you have a strong vested interest in that, I'm sure. We're working on enabling data donation, so making it easier for patients to choose what to be done with their data. If I am a patient at a healthcare system and I have a rare disease and I would like to be able to download, or not even download, but push a button that says, please donate my data to the Multiple Myeloma Foundation, then I can put my data into their database and make it available and potentially get sequenced by them. There's a lot of opportunities there. And then finally, principles around returning data to patients if and where possible. We're also developing new security principles using a somewhat similar process to how we developed privacy principles. We're doing a bunch of things to improve data access across the care continuum. So I talked a little bit about patient access to data, but as I'm sure many of you have discovered, access to data for other players in the system can also be quite challenging. And some of this will flow naturally from some of the things I talked about before, which is clarifications about data ownership, about what HIPAA really means and in what context. But there will also be, a wide range of efforts around making EHR data more easier to move around, more liquid, more interoperable in a variety of different ways. And so that is pretty much a core tenet of one of the things that we're trying to enable. And then the last, so then there's data standards. So improving data standards and modernizing data standards to incorporate all of those different things that we just talked about. So there are some, this is one of the key issues that you guys probably find when trying to pull in data from a variety of different sources, but there's also efforts to expand what we consider to be standard data types. Figuring out how we want to show genomic data at the point of care in such a way so as to shortcut a series of activities. Figuring out how to transmit that data between healthcare systems when you move or when you see an outside specialist. All of those require building better standards around data, and there's been much work by ONC and the Institute of Medicine and others to sort of build that ontology and figure out how to use that. And then finally, modernizing regulations. I think that will really resonate with this room, but I don't know if you guys saw at the beginning of the month, Taha posted a blog post from the FDA about Precision FDA. So FDA is launching a new platform to aggregate data to allow people to do a wide array of different types of analysis to come up with new models for regulatory activity around disparate and personalized medicine tools. And I think it would be of a lot of interest to the folks in this room. So the goal of all of these is sort of to enable new trial methods, the crowd to have access to all of the data, new data sources, and then capabilities at an unprecedented scale. So all of these are foundational. Then there is also a bunch of trials and cohorts being built on top of this. So those include, this morning I was at a meeting at the VA for the Million Veteran Program. So the VA has a million veteran cohort that they're in the process of building. They are north of 350,000 patients enrolled with biospecimens collected, and they are initiating an array of different studies that are primarily focused on on diseases that are of deep concern to veterans, but which will inform things for the rest of us. NIH is also going to build a cohort and then going to have grant making against research on that cohort. They are likely targeting also 1 million patients as a start, and they have a working group that has been meeting on a monthly basis. I know some of you have been to some of the meetings all around the country on a variety of different topics. There was one on mHealth, one on data analytics for large cohorts, and they are going to be issuing some recommendations to the director in the next month. So there will be more clarity about what they're planning on building as well. But there's been a tremendous amount of learning across all of these. So those are sort of some of the actual research activities that will sit on top of it. The National Cancer Institute also has aligned an array of different activities around those specific verticals in precision medicine, where they already had some activities, but they have significantly increased their portfolio. So I think I would prefer to open it up to questions, but first I have a few asks for the types of folks that are in this room. And one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I think I would be interested to hear what you all think about, is how are we going to manage the costs here? What in our current paradigm, when we start looking at precision therapies, it becomes incredibly expensive. That may not be true when they're much more widespread, but how do you all think about changing that paradigm and moving us to a place where this is a more cost-efficient activity for us to be engaged in? Second of all is to hear stories of what works, understanding where this is already happening across the care continuum is incredibly valuable and can help elucidate to us what key things to focus on so that we can remove barriers, and key things to amplify so that other organizations can engage in similar types of activities. So we're looking for stories of things that work to make very public, and also to help encourage research in a similar vein. And then third is what factors need to be included. And by factors, I mean, I've heard conversations here about wearables, about mobile, about patient engagement via mobile, and a variety of other modalities. When I was at Optum, this is something that we worked on a lot and also struggled with a lot. I think there isn't a ton of clarity right now about what is meaningful in that category. I think it sounds like you guys have done more work and more experimentation than most, and we could learn a ton from you about the standards, about what biomarkers look like in that category. And this might fit into the category of what works. But so those are some of the very broad questions that I have for you. I'm also interested in what specific other regulatory changes, what specific other issues you guys feel acutely in doing this type of research, because I think there is always an opportunity to expand and also help focus efforts. So those are some of the different classes of questions that I would be very interested in hearing your ideas on, and hearing stories of things that have worked in your organizations as well. And now I would love to hear some of those stories, or you.
I'll help kick it off. So precision medicine R&D today is expensive because many of the tools and processes of drug development just don't scale very well. If an indication like diabetes is actually 100 different smaller diseases,
Yeah.
it's not 1/100th the price to develop each of those medicines. And so that tends to be, I think, at least one challenge that we face as we think about smaller and smaller cohorts. But it's also one of the reasons I'm really excited about everything you just said, because if this is a moonshot, right, if this is, one of these investments of NASA magnitude, well, when NASA puts a man on the moon, there's a whole lot of other technologies that start to
Yeah.
emerge and help the rest of us. And that's why I'm really excited about PMI, is when I look at the government helping with the policies and the tools and the regulations to enable, say, patients being able to bring their own data into a research study, their own trusted EMR data or otherwise, and the efficiencies that can create, not just for a big million patient cohort, but for all the rest of our little studies. I think there's a great trickle-down impact that I'm really excited about and looking forward to as this proceeds.
Yeah. Are there specific areas that you think are likely to yield really a lot of fruit?
It's not going to come as a surprise to people who know me that the notion of data donation, the notion that that patients can be empowered with their data, that it can be liquid, that they're able to share that wherever they wish to support the research studies that they wish to support, is great for patient empowerment, but transformational for a lot of our business. So much of a clinical trial is a lot of redundant data capture, data that already existed somewhere, but we just don't have access. But if the patient is a hub and they can bring that data with them, whether it's labs, images, pathology, whatever it may be, and they have the power to share that electronically, I think that will be powerful and transformational for a lot of our work, and exciting and empowering for patients.
Absolutely. Please.
Hi, thank you. Jules Mitchell, Target Health. So In terms of personalized medicine, FDA several years ago did a slide presentation and showed that if you actually treated patients who would respond to the drug or had fewer adverse events, even though you wouldn't be treating everybody, which the marketing people like to do because they make a lot of money that way, and you can charge a little more money, but you know you're going to get a response and somebody's not going to end up in the hospital, the actual cost should be lower. So support the diagnostics and the molecular diagnostics to try to predict things, even though there will be some people where the molecular diagnostics will say it's not going to work, but it will work. The other thing, so it actually I think it'll be
So you're
cheap.
talking sort of about figuring out a new mode for approval of companion diagnostics.
Right, and also treat people that actually will respond to the product or know you won't have a side effect.
Yep.
And then even if you, instead of treating 60% of the patients, you treat 30, if you price everything right and you do it right and you don't end up in the hospital, like we were talking earlier today about affordable care, organizations, then it actually will end up saving everybody a lot of money. The other thing from a policy point of view, I think the government ought to really reconsider the whole issue of patent life extension. It takes a long time for drugs to get approved. I mean, you can get accelerated approval and stuff like that, but let's assume you're not getting accelerated approval. That's just another story. Get drugs to the market quicker and then just monitor them. But I think also if you can tell companies that you get a patent life extension of X once your product is approved, as opposed to a generic drug jumping in and not having to do any of the things that the big pharma has to do, you should think about that's a major policy issues to consider.
Yeah, and Bruce was talking about that a little bit, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Barry Peterson Phillips. I just want to make a comment about my thoughts, personal thoughts, on how the government could help in this process. In terms of extracting the vast amount of data, which I think is extremely valuable from all the information that's collected about patients, I think the private sector can probably do that very, very well, and possibly just the people in this room could probably do that very, very well, and meetings such as we've just had help move that along. But the one area where I think the government can make a major contribution is the one you alluded to, and that is the area of the ethics. Because I go through and work through algorithms to extract information knowing that I'm really delving quite deeply into these people's lives, and I say, well, someone else is going to take care of that. And I also know that, in fact, it's a personal responsibility. But if the federal government, through work with bioethics, can help set up guidelines, such as has been done with HIPAA, for example, and expand them and say, this is the way you behave, and if you behave this way, you can have some degree of assurance, both on the part of the investigator and on the part of the patient, that your individual rights will be protected. That, I think, is a major contribution to moving this along. The technical aspects, we can probably move along rather well in the private sector, is my opinion.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. And if you have the time, we actually published the draft privacy principles that we came up with, and I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on them. They're available for everyone.
Imosat is NSCAM with the Food and Drug Administration.
Pardon?
Imosat is NSCAM with the Food and Drug Administration. So I think a lot of times when we think about precision medicine, we think about compendial diagnostics, and I think that's not always the case. So we do a lot of analysis where we try to identify sources of variability, right, and try to treat the right patients with the right dose at the right time. So whether it's body weight, age, gender, race, any of those particular covariates. And it might not be necessarily more expensive because we might not need a compendial diagnostic. No, the issue that we have usually is the right recruitment in clinical trials. Do we have enough body weight range? A lot of times we exclude obese subjects from clinical trials. Do we have minorities represented in clinical trials? And if you look at our clinical trial snapshots for the latest MAEs, that's probably not the case. So I think where we can change is probably working together with industry to get recruitment in a much more diversified way into clinical trials to identify those sources of variability. And then we at least can, for some drugs, do a much better precision, quote-unquote, medicine. I think another thing that we can do is probably have shared data of drugs that didn't get approved. So we learn a lot from drugs that have been approved, but we learn much more from the 99 or 90% of the drugs that don't get approved and fail at an IND stage. If we would look across those data sets and see maybe what sources of variability were or why they failed, I think that would really help us, but we need open data, or at least FDA has that trove of data, but we probably need the tools to look across those different drug development programs.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. You know, to your earlier point, I think some of the questions about duplicating and collecting data, if you think about a post-market world where no matter how the trial was designed, there's a ton of markers and more coming online all the time, you know, seeing what germline genetic test was done for some couple a long time ago that is proven to be a marker. There's a bunch of different things that could feed into sort of a post-market analysis also to help do a better job of targeting. And I think enabling some of that also is something that should be on the table for us.
And we're doing some of actually not the post-market, but the subgroup analysis for clinical trials,
Yeah.
right? And we can see it's almost impossible to do because the numbers of other than Caucasians, for example, is so small in the clinical trial that you
Well, in the
would
trial,
not
exactly.
know, yes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm glad you brought that up because diversity, so I didn't speak a whole lot about the NIH cohort, but the NIH cohort has been a major initiative and a major piece of this. And one of the very key tenets that they have is to make it reflective of America. So, you know, the real goal is to get diversity in recruitment, and there's a lot of thought being put into how to recruit minorities that traditionally choose not to engage in research for very good reason. So, you know, a lot of engagement on those fronts and thinking about how to make sure that minorities are well included. So that's a great point. And if you look actually at the MVP, the Million Veteran Program, they have done a phenomenal job of recruiting minorities. They have a very, very diverse population, a small number of women, but incredibly diverse in terms of ethnic minorities. So it's very exciting. But
Is it because the VA healthcare has much more access and give the information out to people that there is a clinical trial, or is it, how do they get?
I mean, I think if you look at any particular healthcare system, well, so the VA has a more diverse population that it serves in a more high-touch way than most other systems of a similar degree of care. It's okay, we've got some time. So that is one of the advantages. They also do have a very high-touch model, so they have an opportunity to engage and educate, and there is a tremendous amount of trust in the VA from a lot of the veterans who have been receiving care there for a long time. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Christian Gossens from Roche Genentech. I think a reoccurring topic throughout the entire conference was kind of finding the right patients that participate in our trials.
Yep.
We've heard from Greg that also the ripple effects of bringing a man to the moon is very much that lots of other things suddenly start to evolve. So is there a way that the government in the States could help in kind of changing the perception of clinical research overall? You know, kind of we're really struggling, I think that's at least my perception, to really motivate enough people to work with us and to drive forward the interaction between the pharmaceutical industry, which is for some historical reasons maybe sometimes perceived as not the best partner to work with, to really the partner to work with, and that we have more of these private-public partnerships and really kind of changing the innovation culture again. You know, I really think that driving or bringing a rocket to the moon kind of really united the nation.
Yeah.
And here, essentially, I would be looking for something similar.
Thank you. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. I think there's, you know, a lot of things to be done on both sides in terms of openness and transparency and, you know, allowing each other to share data in a way that is ethical, that is respectful of patient choices, but also that is transparent so that everyone can build trust. So I think that you raise a really good point there.
Hi. Chandra Ramanathan from Bayer.
Sorry, from where?
From Bayer Healthcare.
Okay.
Globally, there are like parallel initiatives being planned or ongoing. For example, Project Genomics England from UK. Yeah,
Sorry, there's like a lot of an echo from up here. I can't quite understand you.
Yeah, Project Genomics England from UK. Let me come on.
No, it's actually fine as long as I stand in front of the speaker.
So the question for you is there any plan for collaboration with initiatives or people outside the US so that like learn from each other and globally come up with some kind of a unified action plan?
Yes. Yes, so, you know, we've already done a lot of work with the UK Biobank in understanding some of the approaches that they're taking and figuring out how we can work together once there are similar biobanks in a variety of locations around this country. And we've done a fair bit of collaboration with the Global Alliance for Genomics. I'm not sure of all the specific ways that you're thinking about. Are you thinking about in terms of sort of unifying a regulatory scheme? I think that would be difficult.
First you start with this bioinformatics.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at Project Genomics England, they try to, they're going for a much smaller scale, 100,000 genome, but integrating a very good clinical data with genomic data. So if they're going to do like good bioinformatics in that area and precision medicine is just being started, that would be something you can get from UK to get a jump start.
Yep, absolutely. And in terms of seeding projects in other places, I think also I talked a little bit about the standards. You know, there are genomic standards, but there's also the clinical informatics standards that you guys deal with all the time, trying to figure out how to make sense out of the EHR data. And, you know, the more we have been working with international standards bodies, the more the US has been working to get aligned on that. I think that will also facilitate our ability to merge data sets and work together with other countries as well. So,
Mina, I've got one last question for you. So there's some great resources online, blogs. You guys have been great about getting information out. And as you were mentioning, soliciting feedback. We're in Boston, so I'll spin a JFK question back at you. Asking not what PMI can do for us, but what we can do for PMI. What would be your ask of the folks in the room? What can these folks, we do clinical trials every day, we're collecting data, moving it around, various sources. What can the folks in this room do to help enable some of your goals with PMI?
absolutely. So the first thing, you know, is the thing that I outlined before, which is we are looking for ways to solve the set of problems that I talked about. How are we going to deal with some of the cost questions? What are approaches that are currently working that your organizations are engaged in? So ideas are certainly a major piece of that, and your expertise being brought to bear. Another piece is, you know, we are currently working on developing commitments with the private sector. So commitments from different organizations that want to partner on these sorts of projects, commitments from organizations that say, yes, we want to do a trial with a major component of patient donated data. You know, if one of your organizations wanted to build a trial, and maybe not all of the cohort would be built that way, but some of the cohort would be built that way, we'd be very interested in helping arrange that with whatever health systems were necessary to make the technology work. So we're currently in the process of doing a lot of pulling together of private sector organizations that can be complementary to one another, pulling together, you know, EMR vendors who need to implement a small change with a health system that is interested in participation, and could be with you know, a clinical trial organization that's trying to figure out how to incorporate that type of data from one of their trial sites. So that's another opportunity. We are currently also looking for other types of commitments that feel like they might be right. I know some of the organizations here build mobile applications that are specifically geared towards patient interaction and collecting patient data. That's a great opportunity for you guys to make a commitment to help us understand what to help us understand what interactions really matter, and to help us determine what types of data from that system might be relevant for example, the NIH cohort, and then to help us figure out how to build that in. So it can be something that's available for researchers as they start to apply and look at that open data. So I think there's a tremendous number of ways to partner, both with us and with other organizations who have already made commitments in the space. And I'd be very interested in hearing your ideas and happy to help connect you guys.
I think that's a great way to close. Please join me in thanking Mina.